Vivid verses.
The thing about patterns is that most people don't see them until it's too late. They mistake consistency for weakness, silence for acceptance, patience for permission. By the time they realize their error, the game is already over. I learned that lesson young, watching my father navigate the treacherous waters of academic politics at Northwestern. He taught computational mathematics, and every evening at dinner, he'd dissect the day's departmental maneuvers like chess problems. People confuse non-reaction with non-observation. Ryan, he'd say, cutting his chicken with surgical precision. Let them think you're not paying attention. Meanwhile, you're 3 moves ahead. That wisdom served me well through MIT, through my doctorate in applied physics, through 5 years at Helix Dynamics, where I'd helped pioneer magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion systems that would probably change aviation in the next decade. It served me less well, apparently, in understanding when someone I loved had stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as a prop. The Riverside apartment in downtown Portland overlooked the Willamette, all floor-to-ceiling windows and exposed brick that Jenna had chosen because it screamed success. I'd signed the lease without argument, even though it strained our budget. She worked in marketing for a boutique firm called Catalyst Creative, pulling decent money, but nothing extraordinary. My salary carried most of our weight, especially after Helix had restructured. That restructuring had been the beginning, though I hadn't recognized it then. 3 months ago, the company had pivoted hard into commercialization, which meant shifting resources away from pure research. My division, the Experimental Propulsion Lab, got folded into a larger engineering group. Same salary, same work, but now I reported to someone who reported to someone who understood maybe 30% of what we actually did. It was bureaucratic inefficiency at its finest, the kind of corporate reshuffling that looks good in PowerPoint presentations to investors while degrading actual innovation. I'd been philosophical about it. Science was never just about discovery. It was about navigating the systems that funded discovery. I could adapt. Jenna, however, seemed to interpret the restructuring as a demotion, though technically it wasn't. Or maybe she'd just been looking for an excuse to express something that had been building for a while. Either way, the shift in her behavior was immediate and unmistakable. The first incident happened at her colleague's dinner party in the Pearl District. 8 people around a reclaimed wood table, drinking wine from Ridge Valley vineyards and discussing the usual Portland topics: food carts, hiking trails, the perpetual construction on I-5. The conversation had drifted to careers when Jenna's boss, a sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa, asked what I did. "Ryan's in aerospace," Jenna said before I could answer, her tone carrying a subtle edge I recognized but couldn't quite place. "Well, he was leading a research division. Now he's more of a, what would you call it, honey? A team contributor." The table went quiet for a half-second too long. "I work on experimental propulsion systems," I said evenly. The reporting structure changed, but the work didn't. "Right, but you're not running your own lab anymore," Jenna continued, refilling her wine glass. She was on her third. "It's fine, though. Not everyone needs to be management material." Someone coughed. Someone else asked about dessert. I watched Jenna's reflection in the window, her smile just slightly too bright, performing for an audience I hadn't realized she needed. We drove home in silence. I parallel parked on Oak Street, turned off the engine, and looked at her. What was that about? What about? She was checking her phone, thumb scrolling through Instagram. The comments at dinner. About my job. "Oh my God, Ryan, I was just teasing. You're so sensitive." She opened the car door. It was a joke. Learn to take one. I sat there for a moment after she'd gone inside, running the probability matrices in my head. Was I overreacting? The data said no. Her tone, the timing, the public setting, the defensive deflection when confronted. But I also understood that people had bad nights, misread rooms, said things poorly. One data point wasn't a pattern. I filed it away and followed her upstairs. The second incident came 2 weeks later at my parents' house in Lake Oswego. Sunday dinner, a tradition my mother maintained with military precision. My father had made his famous Brazilian maquica, and we were eating on the back deck, overlooking the garden my mother tended like a sanctuary. The conversation turned to my younger sister, Kate, who'd just accepted a position at a hospital in Seattle. My mother was beaming, asking questions, celebrating the achievement. Kate handled it gracefully, deflecting praise, asking about my work. "Ryan's work is fine," Jenna interjected, "though I think we're all still adjusting to the new normal, aren't we?" She looked at me with what might have been sympathy or might have been something else entirely. It's hard when you've been at the top of your field, and then suddenly you're just part of the machine. My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. My mother's smile froze. Kate looked at me with a question in her eyes. "I'm still doing the same research," I said calmly. "The organizational chart changed. The physics didn't." "Sure, but it's different when you're not the one making decisions." Jenna sipped her wine, addressing the table rather than me. "He pretends it doesn't bother him, but I can tell. Some people are meant to lead, others to follow. No shame in figuring out what you are." The silence that followed felt like vacuum pressure, that absolute absence that occurs before catastrophic decompression. My father set down his fork with deliberate care. My mother found something fascinating about her napkin. Kate's expression had gone from confused to angry on my behalf. I excused myself to help clear plates, and my father followed me into the kitchen. "You want to tell me what's happening there?" he asked quietly. "I'm still collecting data," I said, scraping dishes. He studied me with those sharp mathematician's eyes that had always seen through my childhood evasions. "She's playing a game, Ryan. Question is whether you know what game it is." "I'll figure it out." "I know you will." He squeezed my shoulder. "But don't wait too long to make your move." In the car ride home, I tried again. "Jenna, we need to talk about how you're speaking about me in public." "Oh, here we go." She was looking out the window at the lights of downtown. The sensitive routine again. "It's not about sensitivity. It's about respect. You've now made dismissive comments about my career in front of friends and family. Twice. I'm asking you to stop. I was just being honest about the situation. You used to run a lab, now you don't. That's just facts, Ryan. Sorry if the truth hurts. The truth is I'm doing the same work I've always done. The truth is you're framing it as a failure publicly for reasons I don't understand." She turned to face me then, and something cold flickered across her features. Maybe I'm just tired of pretending everything's perfect when it's not. Maybe I'm allowed to express my feelings. Express them to me, privately, not as entertainment for other people. God, you're exhausting. She pulled out her phone. "Can we just drop it? I'm too tired for one of your analytical lectures." I drove the rest of the way home, mapping the progression. 2 incidents, same pattern, public mockery, private dismissal, gaslighting deflection. The hypothesis forming in my mind wasn't pleasant, but it was consistent with the data. She was testing boundaries, seeing how much she could erode before I'd push back. Or perhaps she was performing for herself, building a narrative where I was diminishing so she could justify whatever decision she'd already made. Either way, I'd now issued a clear request for behavioral change. What happened next would tell me everything I needed to know. What happened next was Carter's birthday party. Carter worked with Jenna at Catalyst Creative, and his apartment in the Alphabet District was packed with marketing professionals, graphic designers, and assorted creative types. Someone had made a signature cocktail involving elderflower liqueur and vodka from Cascade Spirits. A playlist of indie folk and electronica provided background noise just loud enough to require raising voices. I'd spent most of the evening in conversation with a UX designer named Philip, who had fascinating thoughts on human-computer interaction paradigms. We were discussing gestural interfaces when Jenna appeared with two other women from her office, Shannon and Britt. "There you are," Jenna said, her voice carrying that particular brightness that meant she was several drinks in. "We were just talking about you." Warning indicators activated across my mental dashboard, but I kept my expression neutral. "All good things, I hope." Shannon was asking what you do, and I was explaining your whole situation. She gestured with her glass, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "About how you used to be important to your company, but then got, what's the corporate term? Restructured?" Shannon looked uncomfortable. Britt was checking her phone. Philip had gone very still beside me. "I work in experimental aerospace," I said to Shannon. "Propulsion systems research," "which is super impressive," Jenna continued. "Or it was when he was actually leading projects instead of just being another cog. But hey, not everyone can handle the pressure of real leadership, right? At least he's still employed." The cruelty of that last sentence landed like a physical blow, delivered with a smile to a room full of near strangers. This wasn't teasing, wasn't even mockery. It was calculated humiliation, a power play executed with an audience as witness. I watched something shift in Shannon's expression, that particular discomfort people show when they realize they're watching someone cross a line. Britt had stopped pretending to look at her phone. Philip murmured something about getting another drink and disappeared. The room had gone quieter around us, conversations pausing as people sensed conflict the way animals sense storms. I could have responded in multiple ways. Could have defended myself, corrected the record, explained the actual nature of my work and position. Could have been hurt, angry, embarrassed. Those were the reactions she was fishing for, the responses that would feed whatever narrative she was constructing. Instead, I did what my father had taught me. I observed. I collected data. I ran the calculations. Her pupils were dilated, her posture aggressive, her speech just slightly slurred. She was enjoying this, feeding off the attention, the drama. This wasn't alcohol lowering inhibitions to reveal hidden truths. This was alcohol providing permission to express something she'd wanted to express for a while. The public setting wasn't accidental, it was the point. She wanted witnesses. She wanted me diminished in front of people. More importantly, this was the third incident. I'd asked her twice, clearly and directly, to stop this behavior. She not only refused, but escalated. The pattern was complete. The data was conclusive. "Excuse me," I said quietly, and walked to the bathroom. I locked the door and stood there for exactly 90 seconds, breathing steadily, thinking with absolute clarity. The anger some people would feel in this moment was nowhere in my system. Anger clouded judgment, and I needed my judgment perfectly clear. The relationship was over. That much was obvious. The question was execution. I could confront her now, here, have the fight she seemed to want in front of her colleagues. That would be emotionally satisfying perhaps, but strategically foolish. It would make me look reactive, give her ammunition for her narrative, create drama that would follow both of us professionally. I could wait, try again to discuss it privately, give her a fourth chance to modify behavior she now demonstrated 3 times she had no intention of modifying. That would be patient, but patience in the face of established patterns wasn't virtue. It was just accepting disrespect. Or I could do what needed to be done with the decisiveness and clarity that had always served me well. End it cleanly, completely, with no room for negotiation or second-guessing. The third option was the correct one. The calculations were simple. I came out of the bathroom, found Jenna still holding court with her colleagues, and caught her eye. "I'm heading out," I said. "Not feeling well. Don't worry about coming home early. Stay, enjoy the party." She looked briefly surprised, then suspicious. "You okay?" Fine. Just tired. Have fun. I kissed her cheek, a performance for the room, and left. The drive back to the riverside took 12 minutes. I spent them planning logistics. Our lease was in both names, but I'd been the one who'd actually paid the deposit and first month's rent when Jenna's cash flow was tight during the move. I'd kept the receipts. The apartment had cost me more than her from the start, both financially and in terms of compromise. I'd wanted something smaller, cheaper, closer to Helix's campus in Beaverton. She wanted the views, the location, the status. Most of our furniture was hers or jointly purchased. I'd arrived to this relationship with minimal material possessions. My books, my workstation, my climbing gear, a few pieces of furniture I'd bought during grad school. Everything I truly cared about could fit in my car with room to spare. I had friends, though I didn't advertise my social life much. My college roommate, Derek, ran a property management company and had mentioned he had a vacant one-bedroom in the Hawthorne district. It was smaller, cheaper, quieter, everything the Riverside wasn't. I started packing immediately. For hours later, my car was loaded. I'd taken only what was unambiguously mine. Closed books, my computer equipment, a reading chair my grandmother had left me, my rock climbing gear, some kitchen items I'd brought from grad school, a lamp I'd bought at an estate sale. I'd left anything that could be considered shared or disputed. I'd photographed everything. The apartment as I'd left it, the items I'd taken, the empty spaces where my belongings had been. I'd updated my banking to remove her access to my accounts. We'd had some mingled finances for convenience, but nothing legally binding, no joint credit cards or loans. Separating them took 20 minutes online. I'd texted Derek. He'd responded within 5 minutes. Apartment was mine if I wanted it. Could move in immediately. First month rent could wait until my next paycheck. By 2 a.m., I was sitting in my car outside the Riverside, the engine off, looking up at her apartment on the 4th floor. The lights were still off. She was still at the party, probably wondering why I hadn't texted, maybe starting to worry, maybe not thinking about me at all. I pulled out my phone and composed a message. I moved out. My key is on the kitchen counter. I've taken only my personal belongings. You can verify from the photos I've attached. I'll continue to pay my half of rent through the end of the lease term, 3 more months, after which you can decide whether to renew solo or relocate. My portion will be sent directly to the property management company. I asked you twice, clearly and respectfully, to stop publicly mocking and dismissing me. Tonight, made it clear you have no intention of changing that behavior. I'm not interested in being someone's punchline or someone's diminished supporting character. I wish you well, but we're done. Please don't contact me unless it's about lease logistics. I've said everything I need to say. I attached the photos, read the message 3 times checking for emotion that might later embarrass me, found none, and sent it. Then I drove to Derek's property in Hawthorne, unloaded my car, and went to sleep in my new apartment on an air mattress I bought at a 24-hour Cascade Outdoors, surrounded by boxes and the complete quiet of a decision made and executed. My phone started ringing at 7:30 a.m. I was already awake, had been for an hour, sitting in the early morning light with coffee from a French press I'd salvaged from the old apartment. The caller ID showed Jenna's name. I let go to voicemail. She called again at 7:45, again at 8 o'clock. At 8:15, the text started. Ryan, what the fuck? Are you serious right now? You just left? Without even talking to me? This is insane. You can't just leave. I'm coming over. We need to talk about this. Ryan, answer your fucking phone. I responded only to the last one. I don't have anything to add to what I already said. Please respect my decision. She called again. I blocked the number. Then came the emails. Then the messages through social media. All variations on the same theme. Shock, anger, accusations of overreaction, demands that I come back so we could discuss this like adults. The interesting thing about people who've grown accustomed to certain relationship dynamics is that they genuinely cannot process when those dynamics suddenly shift. Jenna had built a model of our relationship where she could push boundaries indefinitely and I would absorb it, complain maybe, but ultimately accept it. My reaction didn't fit her model. Therefore, in her understanding, my reaction was wrong, irrational, something to be corrected through pressure. She'd call from different numbers. I'd block them. She'd send messages through mutual friends. I politely tell those friends this was between Jenna and me. She showed up at Helix 2 days later in the lobby asking reception to calm me down. Security called me instead. I told them I didn't want contact with her. They asked her to leave. The messages continued, evolving from angry to pleading to angry again. You're being ridiculous. I was just joking. You're too sensitive. Fine, you want an apology? I'm sorry there, now come back. You're really going to throw away 2 years over some stupid comments? Everyone thinks you're being crazy BTW. You'll regret this. I didn't respond to any of them. There was nothing to say. I made my position clear. I'd executed my decision cleanly, and I was not interested in being cross-examined about choices I knew were correct. What she couldn't understand, what people like her never understand, is that patience isn't weakness and silence isn't uncertainty. I'd given her multiple opportunities to course correct. She'd chosen not to take them. The consequences were simply the natural result of her own decisions. Derek found me on the roof of the Hawthorne building 3 weeks later. I've been watching the sun set over the West Hills, thinking about nothing in particular, enjoying the rare feeling of complete peace. You doing okay up here? He asked, settling into the chair next to mine. Better than okay, I said and meant it. She's still trying to contact you? Less frequently. She went through the anger phase, the bargaining phase. Now she's in the selective memory phase where she's telling people I left without warning over nothing. What do your people think? My people know better. Kit wants to fly down and slash her tires. Dad sent me a bottle of scotch and a note that said, well played. Mom called her a term I'd never heard my mother use before. Derek laughed. And work. Work is good. Actually, work is great. Without that relationship stress, I've been more productive in 3 weeks than I was in 3 months. We just had a breakthrough on the plasma flow dynamics that could move our timeline up by 6 months. So leaving was the right call. Leaving was the only call. You don't negotiate with someone who's shown you repeatedly they don't respect you. You just remove yourself from the equation. Most people can't do that. The emotional attachment, the fear of being alone, the sunk cost of time invested. Most people aren't trained to see patterns and act on data, I said. Most people hope things will magically improve despite all evidence to the contrary. Hope is fine for many things, but it's a terrible strategy for relationships that have become toxic. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights begin to flicker on across the valley. You think she's figured it out yet? Derek asked. What she actually lost? I considered that. The data suggested Jenna had been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of our relationship dynamics. She'd mistaken my patience for unlimited tolerance, my calm demeanor for emotional availability. She could exploit my non-confrontational nature for an inability to walk away. Maybe, I said. Probably not. People like that usually just find someone new to run the same patterns with. The only difference is now she knows some people will actually call the game and walk away. That might make her more careful, or it might just make her look for someone with even more patience to exploit. Cynical, realistic. I'm not angry at her, Derek. I don't wish her harm. But I also don't believe people fundamentally change unless they genuinely want to, and nothing I've seen suggests she thinks she did anything wrong. In her narrative, I'm the one who overreacted, who couldn't take a joke, who abandoned her without cause. And you're okay with her thinking that? I have no investment in what she thinks anymore. That's the point of leaving. 6 weeks after I'd moved out, my mother invited me to Sunday dinner with a warning that she'd also invited a colleague's daughter who was perfectly nice and in town for a conference. It absolutely was a setup, and the colleague's daughter, a neuroscientist named Dr. Amy Reeves who studied decision-making under uncertainty, was indeed perfectly nice. She was also wickedly funny, intellectually sharp, and completely unimpressed by my attempts to explain magnetohydrodynamics until I actually made the explanation interesting. We talked for 3 hours after dinner, sitting on my parents' back deck while Kate and my mother made increasingly obvious excuses to leave us alone. "So," she said eventually, nursing the last of her wine, "your mother mentioned you were recently single. Is that so? She may have also mentioned that your ex was, and I quote, a narcissistic nightmare who didn't deserve you." I laughed. Mom's being diplomatic. Kate's term was less printable. "What's your term?" I thought about it. Incompatible. We had fundamentally different ideas about respect, communication, and what partnership means. I tried to bridge that gap. Couldn't. Moved on. That's very rational. Is there another way to be? Most people would at least pretend to be more heartbroken. The whole thing about lost love and painful decisions. The decision was only painful if I second-guessed it. I didn't, so it wasn't. She studied me with those sharp researcher's eyes. "You're an interesting person, Ryan Chun." "I'm really not. I just see patterns and act on them." "That's exactly what makes you interesting. Most people see the patterns too. They just don't have the courage to act." We exchanged numbers. Made plans to get coffee the following week. 3 months after I'd moved out, I got a single text from an unknown number. "You were right. I'm sorry. I hope you're doing well." I stared at it for a long moment, running probability calculations on whether it was genuine or strategic, whether it mattered at all. Finally, I typed, "Thank you. I wish you the best." Then I deleted the conversation and blocked the number. Not out of anger, not out of hurt, just out of the simple recognition that some chapters, once closed, should stay that way. Amy and I were 6 dates in when she asked me, walking along the East Bank Esplanade after dinner at a small Ethiopian place in Buckman, "Do you ever wonder if you were too harsh with your ex?" "No," I said. "That's impressively certain." I gave her clear boundaries. She violated them repeatedly. I removed myself from the situation. The math is pretty straightforward. Life isn't math, though, isn't it? You're a neuroscientist. You know that behavior patterns are predictive. You know that people signal their intentions through their actions. You know that hoping someone will change without evidence they want to is just setting yourself up for disappointment. She was quiet for a moment. "Did you love her?" "Yes. But love isn't a reason to accept disrespect. Love without respect is just dependency with emotions attached. You really are the most rational person I've ever met." Is that a compliment or a criticism? "I'm still deciding," she said, but she was smiling. "Then what would you do if I violated your boundaries?" "Tell you clearly that you'd violated them and what needed to change." "And if I did it again?" "I'd tell you again. And if I did it a third time?" I stopped walking and looked at her. "I'd assume you'd heard me and made an active choice to disregard what I'd said. At that point, I'd have to conclude that we had incompatible values about respect and communication, and I'd end the relationship. Just like that. Just like that. That doesn't scare you? Being that willing to walk away. What scares me is the alternative. Staying in situations that make me less than who I am. Accepting treatment I don't deserve out of fear of being alone. Hoping that people will change when they've shown me they won't." She thought about that. "You know what's funny? I think that's actually the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Explaining why I'd leave you under certain circumstances is romantic. No, having the self-respect to have boundaries in the first place. Knowing you're worth enough to enforce them. That's romantic. That's the foundation everything else should be built on." We started walking again, and she took my hand. "For the record," she said, "I have no intention of violating your boundaries." "Good. I have no intention of violating yours. Then I think we'll be just fine." A year later, Amy moved into the Hawthorne apartment with me. It was small, but it was ours, and we filled it with books and coffee equipment and a whiteboard where we'd work through problems together, her neuroscience mixing with my physics in strange and beautiful ways. Sometimes I think about Jenna, about those months when I tried to make something work that was fundamentally broken. I didn't regret the relationship. I'd learned from it, grown from it. But I didn't miss it either. The thing people never understand about walking away is that it's not about anger or revenge or punishment. It's simply about recognizing when a situation isn't serving you and having the clarity and courage to change it. Jenna had gambled that I wouldn't walk away. She'd bet on my patience being infinite, my tolerance being unlimited, my attachment being stronger than my self-respect. She'd bet wrong. And in losing that bet, she'd done me the favor of showing me exactly what I didn't want and exactly what I deserved. I'd taken that lesson with me into everything since, including what I was building with Amy. Clear communication, respected boundaries, mutual regard. The simple understanding that love was important, but it wasn't enough by itself. You also needed respect, trust, and the shared commitment to treat each other as partners rather than props. One quiet evening, Amy looked up from her laptop and asked, "Do you think she ever figured it out? Your ex? What she actually lost?" I thought about it. Honestly, I don't know, and I don't spend time wondering. She made her choices. I made mine. We both get to live with the consequences. Don't you ever want to know if she regrets it? Her regret or lack thereof doesn't change anything. I left because staying was unacceptable, not because I wanted her to feel bad or realize my value. The point wasn't to teach her a lesson. The point was to remove myself from a situation that was damaging. Amy smiled. You know, most people would find that cold. Most people spend years in situations that make them miserable because leaving feels cold. I'd rather be cold and content than warm and disrespected. And that, she said, coming over to kiss me, is why we work. The truth is that some relationships end with explosions, fights and drama and mutual destruction. Some end with slow erosions, partners drifting apart over years. But some relationships end the way mine and Jenna's did, with a clear-eyed assessment of incompatibility, a decisive action, and the refusal to negotiate away self-respect for the comfort of familiarity. People called it cold when I left, called it harsh, extreme, an overreaction to just a few comments. But those people weren't the ones being publicly diminished. They weren't the ones who'd asked clearly for behavior change and been ignored. They weren't the ones calculating the trajectory and recognizing that the destination was nowhere they wanted to be. I was. And I'd made my decision with the same clarity I brought to everything else. Seeing the pattern, running the probabilities, executing the necessary action. Jenna had thought my patience meant she could push indefinitely. She'd learned otherwise. And while I didn't wish her harm, I also had no interest in being the lesson she might or might not learn from. I had my own life to build, my own paths to walk, my own future to create with someone who understood that partnership meant respect, always and in all ways. The rest was just data from experiment concluded. And the results, from where I stood now, were exactly what they should have been.
Thanks for listening.